Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Reddit Stories video. You all seem to really love these creepy, bizarre stories, so I'm going to keep bringing them to you as long as you're watching. As usual, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe and smash the like button. Let's keep growing this community. So, grab a snack, sit back, and get ready for 3 more unnerving Reddit stories in the same twisted style and tone as before. Let's get into the first story. I got access to an unlisted horror game server. I've always been the kind of person who can't resist the lure of hidden corners of the internet. You know, those obscure, outdated message boards or half-broken websites that haven't been updated since 2007? I've spent countless late nights exploring them, hunting for old freeware games, weird betas, or abandoned online communities where only a handful of users still linger. It's thrilling in its own strange way, a chance to discover something no one else has. Usually, the worst thing you stumble upon is a broken link or some cringe-tier fan fiction. But this time, I found something that will probably haunt me for the rest of my life. It all started about 3 weeks after I lost my job. I was in a pretty dark place, bored out of my skull, unsure of my future, and browsing the internet as if it could magically drop a solution into my lap. On one of my deep dives, I noticed a thread titled, "Unlisted Horror Game Server. Dare you enter?" The post was short. Barely 2 lines of text, plus a link that led to some kind of direct game installer. No screenshots, no dev blog, no instructions. Just, if you want the real fear, try this server. You must run it alone in the dark. In hindsight, it was a massive red flag, but I was desperate for excitement. After days of sending out resumes and hearing nothing back, I craved any distraction. My curiosity pounded louder than my common sense. So I clicked. To my surprise, the file downloaded almost instantly. No name, no extension. It was just a single .x with a random string of letters for a title, something like RX4DAV3.x. Another red flag. But I was in that dangerous mental place. Sure, let's see what this does. I ran it. My antivirus software pinged once, warning me about an unrecognized publisher. I overrode it. Reckless, I know. The screen went black for a moment. Then a small console window popped up. A single line of text in plain white. Please type your greatest fear. At first, I thought this was some horror game gimmick. I even chuckled. But then I felt a tiny jolt of unease. Why would a game need that? Was it a psychological test? A new age marketing ploy? Probably just an edgy horror concept, I told myself. I typed in, "being trapped with no escape." My fingers paused over the enter key. A little voice in my head whispered, "Don't do it." But I pressed enter anyway. The console disappeared. A new window opened. It was in a low-resolution, pixel art style, reminiscent of old DOS games. There was a narrow corridor on the screen, the walls a dull gray, lit only by a flickering overhead light fixture. My avatar was just a white dot from a top-down perspective. No fancy models, no instructions. A single text prompt sat in the corner. Use arrows or WASD to move. So I began to wander. The corridor felt endless, repeating the same short layout. Occasionally, the overhead light would flicker, and I'd see, for a fraction of a second, a shape at the far edge of the screen, like a silhouette. It vanished as soon as the light returned to normal. I found my heart rate climbing. Something about the way the game was paced, slow, eerie footsteps echoing, set me on edge. After maybe 15 minutes of walking in circles, I noticed a door at the very bottom of the corridor. It hadn't been there initially, it just appeared. Curious, I maneuvered my little dot of an avatar toward it. The instant I pressed the key to open the door, my entire screen minimized. My desktop wallpaper came into view, but the mouse was moving on its own. I stared in shock as the cursor slid down to my Windows toolbar, opened my computer's camera settings, and toggled my webcam on. Fear started as a little knot in my stomach. I'd heard of malicious software hijacking webcams, but never experienced it firsthand. My camera's LED glowed green, meaning it was live. In the corner of my screen, where the game was still running in a minimized state, text popped up in large, blocky letters. "Why would you look behind you?" I whipped my head around to check my room. It was late, and my tiny apartment was mostly dark, lit only by the glow of my monitor. I saw nothing there, no one lurking behind me. I shuddered, scolding myself for being jumpy, but my skin was crawling. The text changed. "Check again." I'd played my share of horror games, so I recognized an attempt to psyche me out. But something about the timing felt unnatural, like the game was orchestrating a direct conversation with me. Slowly, I glanced over my shoulder a second time. Still nothing. The tension in my body refused to subside, though. I typed into the game's chat box, which had magically appeared when it minimized. "Not funny. Turning off the game." I tried to close the window, but it refused to shut down, like my system was locked. My heart hammered. This wasn't normal. A game can crash, freeze, or glitch, but forcibly preventing a computer from closing it. Definitely malicious code. A new message scrolled in, "You cannot escape." Before I could yank the power cord, my phone buzzed on the desk, making me jump. I lifted it to see a text from an unknown number, "Let it in." My mouth went dry. Let what in? The same second I read that text, I heard a knock at my apartment door. A single, hard rap that echoed in the silence. My blood turned cold. Who the hell would be at my door at nearly midnight? I inched out of my chair, phone clutched tight, and crept over to the door. Knock, knock, knock. This time, 3 slow raps. I peered through the peephole. The hallway light was dim, but I could make out a shape. Somebody just standing there, unmoving. They were either wearing a hood or had some sort of dark cap on, so I couldn't see a face. My instincts screamed to keep the door locked. My phone buzzed again, the same unknown number. Let it in. Screw that. I backed away, trying my best not to make a sound. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might give me away. Outside, the knocking stopped, replaced by a subtle scratching noise, like fingernails along the wood. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the scratching ceased. When I dared to look through the peephole again, the hallway was empty. I found myself sweating like I'd run a mile. I hurried back to my computer, determined to unplug it entirely, but the screen showed the game had returned to full size. My avatar was no longer in the corridor. Instead, the screen displayed a pixelated overhead view of a small living room that looked uncomfortably similar to mine. The furniture layout was the same. The cheap floor lamp in the corner, the old coffee table with chipped paint. It was all there, in lo-fi pixel form. I even recognized a tiny shape meant to be the TV stand. My breath caught in my throat. How? An involuntary tremble coursed through me. I forced the power button on my PC tower, but it didn't respond. I pressed and held it for a full 10 seconds, but the machine refused to shut down. The fan whirred away, as if mocking me. A new line of text flashed across the top of the game screen. "You're not done. You can't leave yet." I tried Control plus Alt plus Delete. Nothing. Alt plus F4. Nothing. The mouse still moved on its own, gliding across the screen to the game's menu. All the typical menu options, save, load, settings, were grayed out, except for Continue. I realized I had zero control over my own PC. My phone buzzed again, but I was too scared to look. The last thing I wanted was another cryptic command or horrifying message. Without warning, the game's corridor reappeared, this time in first-person perspective. The screen was dark, except for a single flickering overhead light. From the shadows, a tall figure came into view, like a jagged silhouette, limbs elongated in that unnatural way you see in nightmares. My stomach clenched. Was this the same entity that had knocked on my door? As the figure drifted closer, the game's sound kicked in. A low, static hiss, with an occasional moan or whisper of words I couldn't make out. My webcam LED was still glowing, feeding who knows what to who knows where. Then, abruptly, the figure lunged at the camera. My entire monitor glitched into a mosaic of static. The hush in my headphones was shattered by a high-pitched squeal. The squeal cut out, and the screen went black. Finally, I found the chance to yank the plug from my computer. The fans died. Silence. Relief flooded me. Maybe now it was over. I was about to collapse onto my couch when my phone started ringing. The caller ID read unknown, but in the area where a phone number should be, there were only random symbols, like a glitch. I hesitated, but fear got the better of me. I answered, half expecting more static or cryptic instructions. Instead, I heard my own voice repeated back at me. It was like an echo of something I'd said earlier that night, but I couldn't recall exactly when. Then came a soft whisper, not in my voice. "We can see you." My door rattled again. Another knock. Whoever was out there had returned, or maybe never left in the first place. My mind was a chaos of questions. Should I call the police? Should I shout at them? Should I stay silent? The phone call ended on its own, replaced by a text message from that same unknown number. Check your closet. Why the closet? To be clear, I have a tiny, one-bedroom apartment. My closet is basically a sliding door with a single overhead shelf and a meager rod for clothes. There's no reason to suspect anything weird in there, unless you count dust bunnies. The text made no sense. Still, I felt compelled to look, a horrifying magnetism pulling me forward. Maybe it was that same sick curiosity that made me click the game link in the first place. I approached the closet with shaky knees. The overhead light in my room flickered. A surge of dread sank into my bones. The same feeling you get when you sense someone standing behind you, even though you're alone. I slid the closet door open, half expecting a jump scare or a hidden intruder, but it was just my clothes, my old suitcase, a few shoe boxes. Nothing out of place, at first. Then I heard it, a faint scraping noise above me. My eyes drifted up. The closet ceiling had a small crawl space, a square panel leading to the building's attic or some utility corridor. I'd never used it. In fact, I'd nearly forgotten it existed. But the scraping was definitely coming from just beyond that panel. Something was moving on the other side, dragging across the wood. I watched, paralyzed, as the panel shifted maybe half an inch. A sliver of darkness peeked through. That was enough for me. I slammed the closet door shut and backed away, blood roaring in my ears. If something was up there, I had no intention of meeting it. In a frenzy, I grabbed my phone, my keys, everything that mattered, and rushed into the living room. My plan was to leave, just run out and call for help. But the second I approached my door, my phone buzzed again. Don't let it follow you. Was it a threat? A warning? My instincts screamed to get out, but I worried about stepping into that dark hallway. For all I knew, the figure from the peephole was still waiting. I froze, torn between wanting to escape and the fear that it was out there, or above me, or both. My mind reeled with possibilities. Could the game have been some elaborate phishing scheme? Did it open a back door into my system, letting a real-world stalker track me? Finally, I mustered a shred of rationality. If I couldn't power off the PC normally, at least I had already yanked the cord. I also remembered my router was still on. I hurried over and unplugged that too, cutting any internet connection. Then I checked my phone for data, switching it to airplane mode just to be safe. Maybe I was going overboard, but in that moment, paranoia felt justified. My apartment sank into silence. No hum of electronics, no glowing lights. I remained near the door, pressing my ear to it, listening for any hint of movement. After a few heartbeats, I decided to risk it. I stepped into the hallway. It was empty, no sign of the hooded figure. I let the door lock behind me and hurried down the corridor to the stairwell, flicking the lights on as I went. Nothing. Outside, the night air was strangely cold for the season, sending a chill through my sweat-soaked shirt. I walked around the block, phone in hand, glancing up at my windows. No one, I told myself. There's no one up there. But I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. I half expected to see that game figure's elongated silhouette in one of the windows. I called my best friend from a payphone. Yes, they still exist in some corners of the city. He was alarmed by my frantic tone, but to his credit, he came right over. By the time we returned to my apartment, dawn was breaking. We checked every inch, the closet, the crawl space, even the bedroom windows. Nothing was amiss. If not for the remains of the game's .exe on my desktop, which I made him see for himself, he might have thought I'd lost it. Over the next few days, I tried to wipe my hard drive, reinstall my OS, and even replace my entire PC tower. I changed my phone number. I couldn't erase the memory, though. Every time I turned off the lights, I'd feel that same foreboding presence, as if something was watching from the corners. I'd glance at the closet door each morning, expecting it to be open an inch, but it never was. The knocks stopped. The texts ceased. It was almost like it never happened. Except, sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I hear faint scratching from the ceiling above the closet. Logic says it's probably just pipes or the building settling. Typical apartment noises, right? But a more paranoid part of me imagines that same figure, crouched in the cramped darkness of the crawl space, waiting. For what? I don't know. One thing's certain, I'm done searching for weird games online. That addictive desire to explore secret corners of the internet vanished the night I found that unlisted horror server. Every so often, I'll see a random post about haunted software or cursed games, and a shiver runs through me. I scroll right by, resisting the impulse to click. I've learned my lesson the hard way. In the grand scheme of my life, it was the scariest night I've ever experienced. And as cliché as it sounds, I truly feel lucky to be alive and in one piece, or at least as lucky as someone can be when they can't quite forget the faint, echoing message. Let it in. Even now, with all connections severed, I can't help but wonder if it is still out there somewhere, searching for a new victim. Or if someday, somehow, that unstoppable .x will resurrect itself on my new computer, bringing those knocks on my door once again. Until then, the best advice I can give is this. If you ever see a mysterious link or file promising real fear or an unlisted horror server, think twice. Curiosity might lead you down a rabbit hole darker and deeper than you ever imagined. Me? I'm sleeping with the lights on, and I haven't played a video game at night since. Some nightmares, it turns out, aren't confined to the digital world. They can, and will, crawl right into your reality if you invite them in, even by accident. And once that invitation's sent, you may find there's no easy way to revoke it. Story 2, The Vanishing Motel Route. I was driving back from a grueling work trip, feeling completely drained. The road I'd been on for the past 2 hours cut through endless fields on either side, with no towns in sight. I was aware that heading home would take at least 3 more hours, but something about the darkness pressing in on that isolated highway made it feel like it could stretch on forever. My car's GPS kept buffering and losing signal, and my phone data wasn't faring any better. Typical for these middle-of-nowhere zones. At some point, I passed a rusted old sign, scrawled with chipped white paint, Motel 22, 1 mile. I almost missed it in the gloom. It stood at a precarious angle, as if a strong wind could knock it clean over. Normally, I might have thought twice about pulling into a random motel, especially one that seemed one stiff breeze away from collapsing. But I was exhausted to the point that my eyes stung just trying to keep them open. A bed, any bed, sounded like paradise. About half a mile later, my headlights caught the flicker of a neon sign in the distance. Motel 22. Even from that far away, I could see half the letters were burnt out, so it really just read, Ot 22. The parking lot was unpaved and full of pits, forcing me to slow down and swerve as I searched for a spot near what appeared to be the office. A single, dusty lamp post illuminated a small patch of gravel by the entrance, creating shadows that danced every time the lamp flickered. I killed the engine, letting the silence crash over me. That was the first time I noticed how eerie the place was. There was no traffic noise. If there was a highway, it felt like miles away. Insects should have been chirping this time of year, but I heard nothing but the hum of that one lamppost. The emptiness pressed against my ears as I stepped out of the car, each crunch of gravel under my shoes sounding painfully loud. The office door was unlocked, so I pushed it open with a creak. Inside, harsh fluorescent lighting revealed yellowed wallpaper curling at the edges, and a single desk stacked with old receipts and a battered guest ledger. Slumped in a swivel chair was a bored-looking clerk, a lanky guy with greasy hair falling into his eyes. He barely glanced up from some tattered magazine. "Help you?" he asked in a low monotone. "Yeah," I said, clearing my throat. "I need a room, just for the night, checking out early tomorrow." He produced a brass key from somewhere behind the desk. No electronic key card, just an old-fashioned key attached to a blue plastic fob with the number 5. "Room 5, he said flatly, setting it in front of me. "We only take cash," he added, flipping a laminated sheet that showed a nightly rate. Thankfully, I had enough cash on me. I'd been to a conference where local vendors only accepted paper bills, so I paid the fee. He flicked through the bills, then handed me a receipt. That was it. No, enjoy your stay, no, need extra towels. He just sank back into his chair, eyes flicking up briefly to track me as I left. Room 5 sat on the far left side of a series of identical doors. Each door had chipped paint and a small overhead bulb that might once have been bright, but now only gave off a dull, yellowish glow. I tried not to dwell on how grim everything looked. The only thing I really cared about was that I had a bed for the night. I unlocked the door, flipped on the light, and surveyed the space. The inside was even more depressing than the exterior. Stained carpet, a sagging mattress on a squeaky frame, and a TV that looked older than I was. The musty smell of old smoke and dampness clung to every surface. But I was too tired to care. I set my phone on the rickety bedside table, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the bed. It felt like lying on old springs under a thin layer of padding, but I was beyond exhausted. I think I dozed off within minutes. Sometime later, I jolted awake. I didn't know why at first, then I heard it. A low, droning hum that sounded like chanting. Groggy, I checked my phone, 12:01 a.m., my battery was at 30%, a single bar of reception. Great. The chanting was distant, like it was drifting through the walls from somewhere outside. Fear prickled along the back of my neck, but I told myself it might just be wind or an old pipe in the walls, resonating in a weird way, right? I couldn't shake off the unease, so I decided to peek outside. I threw on my jacket and cracked the door open, letting the night air wash over my face. It was still impossibly silent. The chanting, if that's what it had been, stopped abruptly the second I opened the door. The corridor of rooms was dimly lit by a single overhead light near the office, leaving much of the motel in shadow. That's when I realized something was off. Every other door was wide open, but no lights were on inside any of them. Empty black doorways, like gaping mouths of rooms that shouldn't be vacant if the doors were open. I took a step forward, trying to see if anyone was out there. A wave of dread crept over me. Imagine a row of identical rooms, all open to the night. No sign of life inside, yet you can't shake the feeling that someone or something is watching. I mustered up the courage to approach the nearest open doorway, room 6. When I got close enough to peer in, I flicked on my phone's flashlight. Bare mattress, no sheets. The furniture was overturned as if someone had left in a hurry. A chill ran up my spine. If there'd been guests here, they clearly weren't staying anymore. Suddenly, I heard a bang from behind me. I spun, heart pounding. My door, room 5, had slammed shut on its own. Now it stood closed, locked. My phone was in my hand, but my car keys were still inside. Perfect. Fear coiled in my stomach like a cold snake. For a second, I debated trying to break in through the window, but something made me pause. The entire atmosphere felt hostile, like if I stepped back into that room, I wouldn't be alone. The overhead lamp outside the office flickered, drawing my attention. I hurried toward the office, half hoping the clerk was there and could explain what was going on. Maybe some twisted prank. But the office was dark. The fluorescent lights inside had been turned off. As I pushed the door open, the only illumination came from that flickering lamp outside, casting dancing shadows across the old wallpaper. The clerk was gone. His chair was empty, spinning slightly as if recently vacated. On the counter lay a single piece of paper with a handwritten message. Room 5 is not yours. My throat tightened. Not mine? Then whose is it? I reached for the note, my mind racing. That's when I heard a door slam again from somewhere in the row of rooms. My pulse hammered. There was no way I was going back to room 5 not after this note. Desperate, I stepped outside once more. I nearly dropped my phone when I saw him standing there, the motel clerk. Or at least, it looked like him. He was dressed differently now, in a dirty hoodie drawn tight over his face. The hood cast a shadow, obscuring his eyes. Even from a distance, I could see his mouth was parted in this unnatural grin. He raised his arm slowly and pointed past me toward the parking lot. I turned to see what he was indicating, and my stomach lurched. A cluster of people stood at the far edge of the motel's property, just beyond the glow of the lamppost. They wore dusty, ragged clothing, each gripping an old-fashioned motel key by their side. Something about them reminded me of broken puppets, swaying ever so slightly but not advancing. The metallic jingle of their keys rattled through the night air. In a trembling voice, I called out, "Who are you people? What do you want?" But not one of them replied. They just kept swaying, gripping those keys that glinted in the weak light. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. I tore my gaze from the silent figures and glanced at the screen. The sender was unknown. "Drive away. Don't look back." That was all it said. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I sprinted to my car, foolishly hoping my keys were still inside. I yanked the driver's door open. There they were, dangling from the ignition. I could have sworn I'd put them in my pocket earlier, but I didn't have time to question it. The figures in the distance began to shuffle closer, their steps echoing. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and turned the key. The engine coughed to life. With adrenaline coursing through me, I stomped on the gas, jerking the steering wheel to avoid potholes. I sped out of the lot so fast the tires spat gravel behind me. My headlights caught a glimpse of the group as I peeled away. Now they were standing in a line near the motel sign, keys raised in unison, like they were waving me off or beckoning me to come back. My heart hammered in my chest for miles as I barreled down the empty road. The clock on my dashboard read 12:05 a.m. Barely any time had passed. When I finally caught a glimpse of civilization, a distant gas station lit by fluorescent tubes, I pulled in, cut the engine, and tried to steady my breathing. I fumbled for my phone, intending to reread the text or check if there were any new messages, but the text was gone, completely scrubbed from my inbox. It was like it never existed. That night, I didn't sleep. I parked under the bright lights of the gas station until dawn, sipping stale coffee and replaying the events in my mind. Even now, the memory haunts me. The row of open motel doors, the chanting, the note that said, "Room 5 is not yours," and those eerie, key-clutching figures. No matter how tired I am, I've made a rule since then. If I'm driving late at night and see a half-lit sign for a shady motel, I'll keep driving, maybe forever. Story 3, Highway to Nowhere, the toll booth that shouldn't exist. I was driving home after an especially grueling week. A week that left me utterly exhausted after endless late nights at the office, grueling meetings, and a nagging sense that I was slowly disappearing into routine. The long stretch of highway I found myself on that night was an endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the inky blackness. There was no hum of civilization, no comforting murmur of nearby towns, just the solitary sound of my tires rolling over the pavement and the soft, constant whisper of the wind. I'd been on the road for hours, each mile blending into the next, and my GPS was acting up again. It flashed vague directions and then lost signal entirely. In these parts, cell service was notoriously unreliable, and tonight was no exception. The darkness pressed in from all sides, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being swallowed by the night. Then, as if summoned by fate, I saw something unexpected. A small, flickering neon sign up ahead. I slowed my car, my eyes straining to make out the details. As I drew nearer, a worn, rusted sign came into focus. A single toll booth stood there, isolated on the side of the highway. The sign read simply, "Midnight Toll, collecting passage since 1952. The words sent a chill down my spine. I distinctly remembered this highway having been modernized years ago, and the idea of a relic toll booth in the middle of nowhere was absurd. Yet it was unmistakably there. My heart pounded as I approached the booth. The structure was old and weather-beaten, chipped red paint, windows streaked with grime, and a heavy, creaking barrier arm that hung limply as if it hadn't moved in decades. I pulled up to the booth and killed the engine, allowing the silence of the night to settle in. I stepped out of my car, the cold night air hitting me like a slap as I walked toward the booth. Every crunch of gravel under my shoes echoed into the vast emptiness. The toll booth's door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated for just a moment before pushing it open. Inside, a single, dimly lit room greeted me. The air was stale, filled with the musty odor of old paper and rust. Behind a dusty counter sat a man, or something that resembled one. His face was hidden in the shadows, and only the faint glimmer of a sputtering lamp revealed the outline of his features. His eyes, when they caught the light, looked vacant, almost as if he weren't fully there. Without a word, he slid a worn ledger across the counter. The ledger's pages were yellowed and fragile, filled with entries in hurried, slanted handwriting. Next to it, a small handwritten note read, "Toll, $5 in faded ink." I fumbled with my wallet, my hands trembling ever so slightly as I pulled out a crisp $5 bill. As I handed the cash over, I couldn't help but notice that his fingers brushed against mine with an unnatural coldness, like touching a slab of ice. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced at it, expecting a mundane notification. Instead, the screen flashed a single message in stark white text against a black background. "Pay the toll, or the road pays for you." I froze. My throat tightened, and I felt as if I'd inhaled a lungful of ice-cold air. I looked back at the attendant. His thin lips twitched into an almost imperceptible smile, but his eyes remained shadowed and unreadable. With my heart pounding like a drum, I cleared my throat and said, "All right, here's the money." The attendant took the bill, his fingers lingering a beat too long on mine before he slid the ledger back into place. There was no further word from him, just silence and the buzz of that solitary lamp overhead. Once the barrier arm creaked upward, I hurriedly drove away, my mind reeling with questions and dread. The moment I merged back onto the highway, everything began to change. The familiar roadside landmarks I'd been counting on for miles were suddenly absent. The modern signs and mile markers were replaced by archaic, almost forgotten markers, as if I had been transported back in time. My GPS struggled to re-establish a connection, flashing random coordinates and then going blank. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, an uneasy feeling settling deep in my bones. For the next 15 minutes, the road twisted and turned in ways that defied logic. It was as though I had entered a labyrinth with no exit. Every curve seemed to lead me deeper into darkness, and my headlights revealed nothing but an endless stretch of empty, desolate highway. At times, I thought I saw fleeting shapes at the periphery of my vision, shadows that moved in sync with my car, only to vanish when I looked directly at them. I tried switching on the radio for some distraction, but all I got was static. Occasionally, the static was broken by what sounded like indistinct whispers, murmurs that I couldn't quite make out. Each time the whispers reached a crescendo, my pulse would spike, and I'd grip the wheel even tighter. Then, as if scripted by some unseen hand, my phone buzzed again. This time the message was even more direct. "Don't look back." My heart lurched. I forced myself not to glance in the rearview mirror, even though every instinct screamed to check if I was being followed. The warning echoed in my mind as I accelerated, desperate to outrun whatever might be trailing me. As I pushed forward, the highway's bends grew more treacherous. The road was narrowing, and the darkness outside seemed to press in on all sides. I could feel the oppressive weight of unseen eyes watching me from the void. Every so often, I would catch a glimpse in the mirror, a dark figure standing at the edge of the road, motionless beneath a solitary street lamp. But each time, when I looked again, there was nothing there except the flickering glow of the lamp and the endless dark. The sense of foreboding grew stronger with every mile, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far beyond my understanding. Then, almost without warning, the road split unexpectedly. One branch was illuminated by a feeble glow from distant streetlights, promising an exit back to civilization, and the other was a narrow, overgrown lane disappearing into the dense woods. I hesitated, my mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. The voice from my phone echoed once more in my head. Don't look back. Reluctantly, I chose the lit exit, steering my car onto the more familiar route. For a few agonizing moments, I allowed myself a fragile sense of relief. The lit road was familiar, and I could see the vague outlines of small-town buildings in the distance. My breathing began to steady, and the oppressive feeling that had gripped me started to recede. But as I merged onto the exit ramp, my phone buzzed yet again. A final, chilling message appeared on the screen. You're not done yet. That message struck me like a physical blow. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest as I forced my car to a stop on the side of the road. I sat there, the engine idling in the darkness, and stared at the empty highway ahead, trying to comprehend the meaning behind those words. A gas station appeared in the distance like a beacon of salvation, a small, lonely outpost of light in the midst of the darkness. I pulled in slowly, parking under the flickering neon sign that read, "Open." The gas station was nearly deserted. The interior was sparse and utilitarian, with a few vending machines and a counter that had seen better days. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting a pale glow over the worn linoleum floor. I stepped inside, my hands trembling as I clutched my phone. I tried calling a friend for comfort or to explain what had just happened, but my phone showed no signal, only the eerie silence of an abandoned late-night outpost. I sat on a metal chair by the counter, replaying the events of the night in my mind. The ancient toll booth, the cryptic warnings, the surreal road that had led me astray. All of it swirled together into a nightmarish blur. While I sipped a cup of lukewarm coffee, I struck up a brief conversation with the attendant, a tired, middle-aged man with deep lines etched into his face. I asked if he knew anything about that stretch of highway or any odd occurrences in the area. He stared at me for a moment, as if weighing whether he should share something that might send shivers down my spine. Finally, in a hushed voice, he said, "There have been stories. Old-timers talk about a phantom toll booth that appears on stormy nights. They say it's a relic from a past that never really died. Folks who've encountered it don't forget it, and sometimes it doesn't let you go easily." I shuddered at his words. The idea of a phantom toll booth was dismissed by most as urban legend, but tonight I had experienced something far beyond explanation. I thanked him, and after a few more minutes of restless waiting for dawn, I finally started my car and set off once again. This time, determined to leave that nightmarish stretch of road behind. As I drove, the familiar landscapes slowly returned. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by the soft hues of early dawn. The radio finally sprang to life, and the static was replaced by the comforting voices of morning news. Yet, despite the return to normalcy, I couldn't shake the lingering dread. Every time I glanced at my rearview mirror, I half expected to see that hooded toll collector, or those ghostly figures with keys in hand. At a red light near an exit, I pulled over for a moment, my mind racing through every detail of the night. I replayed the messages over and over. Pay the toll, or the road pays for you. Don't look back. You're not done yet. These messages weren't just words, they were warnings, almost as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate with me from beyond the veil of normalcy. I felt as though I had been chosen to bear witness to a secret too terrifying to understand. I recalled how the toll booth had appeared out of nowhere, a relic that should have been forgotten with the old road. I wondered if it was some sort of portal, or a remnant of a time when the world was different. I began researching local lore once I got home, combing through old newspaper clippings and town records. I discovered that decades ago, before the highway was modernized, there had been a toll booth that many locals claimed was cursed. It was said that drivers who paid the toll that night sometimes experienced inexplicable detours, moments of lost time, or encounters with apparitions. The few reports that surfaced were dismissed as overactive imaginations fueled by exhaustion and alcohol. But now, in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but believe there was something more sinister at work. In the weeks following that night, sleep became a rare luxury. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see the flickering neon of that toll booth and the ghostly face of the toll collector. I began avoiding long drives after dark altogether. Even during daylight, I found myself glancing at road signs and checking my mirrors more than necessary, half expecting to see a remnant of that cursed booth reappear. I couldn't help but wonder what the messages truly meant. Pay the toll, or the road pays for you, seemed to suggest that the toll wasn't just a monetary transaction, it was a metaphysical debt. And don't look back felt like a warning to never question what was happening behind me, lest I invite whatever force was following me to manifest fully. The final message, "You're not done yet," haunted my every thought, as if that night had not released me from its grip, and some unfinished business was waiting for me down that endless, dark stretch of highway. One night, several months later, as I was driving along a relatively busy road, I saw a figure in the distance near a toll booth that hadn't been there before. I slowed my car, my heart pounding in my ears, but when I reached the spot, it had vanished as if it were nothing more than a trick of the light. I sat there for several minutes, wondering if I was losing my mind or if the phantom toll was following me in ways I couldn't comprehend. I began piecing together the possibility that the toll booth was more than just an urban legend. It seemed to exist on the fringes of reality, a spectral checkpoint that collected not money, but something far more abstract, a toll paid in time, memories, or even a piece of one's soul. I delved into esoteric texts and obscure local histories. Though nothing definitive emerged, a recurring theme became clear. There are forces beyond our comprehension that use familiar objects, a toll booth, a roadside sign, as conduits for their mysterious transactions. One rainy evening, not long after my encounter, I decided to take a detour on a side road known for its scenic views. The rain fell in heavy sheets, blurring the line between reality and a nightmare. My windshield wipers struggled to keep up, and for a moment I thought I saw a flash of light in the distance, a silhouette that resembled the toll booth. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the rain and my frayed nerves, but the image lingered in my mind long after I drove past it. As I navigated the slick road, every shadow seemed to whisper secrets. Every curve hinted that something was watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how far I drove, the phantom toll was never truly behind me. It was part of the road, a constant reminder that some debts never fade away. Eventually, I pulled over at a small roadside diner, a cozy establishment offering a brief respite from the storm. Over a cup of steaming coffee, I listened to the murmurs of other late-night travelers. An elderly man, hunched over his table, leaned in and, in a raspy voice, murmured, "They say, if you ever see that booth, you should never pay its toll. It comes at a cost you can't imagine." His tired eyes held a spark of knowing fear, and I nodded silently, realizing that my experience was a cautionary tale, a warning to all who venture into the darkness with weary souls. Returning home, I found that the memory of that night had become an indelible part of me. I rewatched old videos of my drives, listened to recordings of my own voice recounting the events, and even kept a small journal of every strange occurrence on the road. There were nights when I would wake in a cold sweat, the images of the toll booth and its spectral attendant replaying in my mind like a broken record. I began sharing my story at local gatherings and on online forums, hoping that by speaking out I might exorcise some of the lingering dread. To my surprise, I wasn't alone. Others shared similar stories. Tales of strange toll booths appearing on desolate highways, drivers vanishing for minutes or hours before reappearing, and eerie messages that seemed to come from nowhere. One man recounted how, after paying a toll at a booth resembling mine, his car ended up off course, arriving in a ghost town that wasn't on any map. Another told of a woman who, while driving home, saw a toll collector in her rearview mirror, a figure that disappeared the moment she dared to look directly. In the months and years that followed, I made a personal vow to avoid long drives after dark. Yet, even in the safety of daylight, a lingering unease followed me. I would catch myself glancing at road signs, checking my mirrors, and wondering if that cursed booth would ever reappear. The thought of it became a metaphor, a reminder that some debts once incurred are never truly repaid. I started to believe that the midnight toll wasn't simply a ghost story. It was a warning that some forces exist beyond our control, demanding their due in ways we cannot comprehend. Even now, as I drive on quieter roads, a chill creeps up my spine for no apparent reason. I keep my phone locked, wary of any unwanted messages, yet every so often I catch a glimpse of a notification that vanishes as quickly as it appears. I've come to understand that the road never forgets, and sometimes the past demands its due in the present. That ancient toll booth, with its worn sign and its spectral attendant, has become a part of my story, a dark reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. I've learned that if you ever find yourself on a lonely road in the dead of night, and you come across a flickering neon sign proclaiming, "Midnight Toll, Collecting Passage," since 1952, you might want to think twice before pulling over. There are some things that aren't meant to be paid for with money alone. Instead, the toll might exact a price far greater. A price paid in time, memories, or even a piece of your very soul. And so, as I sit here now recounting these events, I am reminded of that fateful night and the chilling messages that continue to haunt me. The experience changed me in ways I still struggle to understand. Every dark, lonely stretch of road serves as a silent testament to that encounter, a reminder that the world is filled with secrets that lurk just beyond the veil of normalcy, waiting for an unsuspecting traveler to stumble upon them. I share this story not to scare you, well, maybe a little, but to remind you that sometimes the road chooses you, and when it does, it doesn't let you go so easily. So if you ever find yourself alone on a dark highway, remember my tale and keep your headlights on. Drive carefully, and whatever you do, don't look back. Because once you do, you might just find that the past isn't as far behind you as you'd like to believe. Stay safe out there, and remember, some roads hide secrets that are best left unexplored. All right, guys, those were the 3 stories I wanted to share with you tonight. Both of them still give me the chills just thinking about it, especially the part with that weird chanting in the motel. Let me know which story freaked you out more. Was it the bizarre horror game or the eerie, disappearing motel? Drop a comment down below, and while you're at it, remember to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, and I appreciate every single one of you tuning in. Until next time, stay safe out there, don't click weird links, and if you see a random open door at a motel, maybe just keep driving. See you later.